the house at the end of Lantern Lane. The key didn't fit either lock. That was the first strange thing. The second was the light, a single window, glowing soft and yellow, in a house that had supposedly stood empty for 6 years. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is the house, and the woman who left it to me, and the 11 letters I found in a drawer that wasn't supposed to open. I'd never met my great-aunt Eleanor. My mother spoke of her rarely and always carefully, the way you'd describe someone you respected but didn't quite understand. She kept to herself. Your aunt. Never married. Lived out at the end of Lantern Lane with her garden and her birds. And that was enough for her. When the lawyer's letter came, 3 weeks after Eleanor passed in her sleep at 91, it took me a full day to remember who she even was. The house had been left to me, not to my mother, not to my cousins. To me, a niece twice removed who Eleanor had met exactly once, at a funeral, when I was 9 years old. I remembered almost nothing about that day except that she'd given me a peppermint from her coat pocket and told me very seriously that the garden gate should always be latched twice, because once is a suggestion and twice is a promise. I drove out to clear the house before putting it on the market. One night, I told myself, in and out. I had a flashlight, a box of bin bags, and absolutely no intention of staying past sunset. The lane was narrower than the map suggested, hedgerows pressing close on both sides, and by the time the house came into view, the light was already turning that particular shade of blue that isn't quite evening yet, but isn't day anymore either. The house itself was modest. Stone, ivy along one wall, a crooked chimney, a garden gone wild with roses that had clearly once been trained along trellises and had since decided to do as they pleased. And in the front window, on the ground floor, a candle was burning. I stood at the gate for a long moment. The house had been empty, by every account, since Eleanor's stroke 6 years earlier, after which she'd lived in a care home until she died. No one had a key but me, or so the lawyer had said. I checked the letter again. 2 keys, in a sealed envelope, both supposedly for the front door. Neither fit. I'm not a brave person, particularly, but I am a curious one, and curiosity has a way of overruling sense when the hour is late and the house is quiet, and there's a small orange flame flickering behind old glass, like it's been waiting for you. I went round the back. The kitchen door was unlocked, not forced, not broken, simply unlocked, as if someone had walked out for a moment and meant to come right back. The candle, when I found it, was a stub of an inch, sitting on the windowsill in a brass holder gone green with age. It had clearly been lit that very evening. The wax around the wick was still soft. I stood in that kitchen for a long time before I worked up the nerve to go any further into the house. Nothing else was disturbed. No footprints, no signs of a squatter or a curious neighbor. The dust on the hallway floor was undisturbed except for my own footsteps. I told myself, eventually, that it must have been a timer candle, the battery kind, set going off some old schedule no one had thought to cancel. Except battery candles don't smell of beeswax. And this one did, faintly, sweetly. Under the older smell of dust and old paper that fills any house that's been shut up a long while. I didn't sleep that first night. I sat in Eleanor's kitchen with my flashlight and a mug of tea I'd made from a tin I found in the cupboard, and I told myself I'd start clearing things out properly come morning. Morning came, and with it, the kind of pale, washed light that makes old houses look gentler than they are at night. I started in the front room. Books, mostly. Gardening manuals, a few well-worn novels, a stack of correspondence about the local birdwatching society that Eleanor had apparently run for a decade and a half. Ordinary things. The things of a quiet, contained life. It was the writing desk that stopped me. A small bureau, mahogany, the kind with a fold-down front and a row of tiny drawers behind it. Most of them held the expected things. Stamps, a magnifying glass, pressed flowers gone the color of weak tea. But the bottom drawer was locked, and there was no key for it among the others. It took me 20 minutes with a butter knife and considerably more patience than I usually have to get it open. Inside, tied with faded green ribbon, were 11 envelopes. Each one was addressed to Eleanor in the same handwriting, a slanted, old-fashioned cursive that pressed hard enough into the paper to leave a ghost of itself on the envelope beneath. Each one had a different postmark, a different year, always the same month, late September. The most recent was from 11 months ago. The oldest was postmarked 43 years earlier. Every single one of them was unopened. I want to tell you I left them alone, out of respect, and went back to my sorting. I didn't. I sat on the floor of that front room with the autumn light coming weak and gold through dusty windows. And I opened the oldest one first because some part of me already understood that whatever this was, it mattered. And I needed to understand it from the beginning. Eleanor, I don't expect you'll read this. I don't expect you've read any of the others either, if you've kept them the way I imagine you have. In a drawer, unopened, the way you keep everything you've decided not to feel. But I write because the alternative is worse. The alternative is letting a year pass where I didn't tell you the roses came back early this spring, and that I thought of the gate, and the latch, and the way you used to say twice was a promise. I am well. I hope, wherever you've put yourself, that you are too. T. I read all 11, oldest to newest, sitting on that floor until the light went from gold to gray to nothing at all, and I had to find a lamp. They were short, every one of them, 3 or 4 sentences, sometimes less. But they were written every September, without fail, for 43 years, by someone who signed only T, to a woman who had apparently never opened a single one. The later letters mentioned a house, a garden of his own, a dog that died and was missed, a hip operation that had gone well enough. Small, ordinary updates, the way you'd tell an old friend what they'd missed. Never once did they ask her to write back. Never once did they ask why she didn't. The most recent letter, the one from 11 months ago, was different. The handwriting was the same, but shakier. Eleanor, 43 roses, if my count is right. Though I confess I may have lost a year somewhere in the middle, the way memory does. I am told by people who know more about these things than I do that I haven't long. I find I'm not afraid of it, particularly. I find I'm only sorry for one thing, and you already know what it is. If you ever do read this, any of these, know that none of it was a question. I never needed an answer. I only needed you to know. T. I didn't know who T was. I didn't know what had happened between him and Eleanor, why she'd kept every single letter and opened none of them, why she'd latched a gate twice and told a 9-year-old that twice was a promise. I went looking, that night, for the rest of the story, because by then I couldn't have stopped if I'd wanted to. I found it in the back of an old photo album, tucked into the inside cover where the binding had come loose. A single photograph, black and white, 2 young people standing at, I recognized it immediately, the very gate at the front of this garden. Eleanor, perhaps 20, laughing at something out of frame. Beside her, a young man with his hand resting on the latch, looking not at the camera, but at her. On the back, in pencil, almost too faint to read, T and E, the summer the roses first climbed the trellis. I asked around the village the next day, the way you do when a place still has people who remember things. An elderly man at the little shop on the corner, who'd known Eleanor 60 years, told me what he knew, which wasn't everything, but was enough. There had been a young man, Thomas, who'd courted Eleanor in her 20s, and her father, by all accounts, had not approved. Thomas had gone abroad for work, the way young men did then, with every intention of writing, of returning, of making something of himself worth her father's approval. And for the first 2 years, he had written properly, often, the way people in love write when distance is the only obstacle. Eleanor's father had intercepted every one of those early letters and burned them, telling his daughter nothing and telling Thomas in a letter forged in her name that she'd married someone else and wished him well. Thomas believed it. Mostly. Enough to stop expecting a reply, but apparently never quite enough to stop writing. Once a year, every September, the month they'd met, for the rest of his life, on the chance that somehow, someday, it might reach her, and she might understand that he'd never stopped. Eleanor, the old man told me, hadn't learned the truth of her father's lie until she was nearly 50, by which point Thomas had married, had a family of his own. And Eleanor had decided, in the particular stubborn way of people who've been hurt young, that it was too late, too complicated, too much to unravel. So she kept the letters. Everyone. Unopened. Not because she didn't care, the old man said, but because opening them would have meant feeling something she'd spent 30 years training herself not to feel. She never married, he said, never really tried, far as anyone could tell. Just her and that garden and the gate she latched twice, every single night, rain or shine, right up until she couldn't anymore. I sat with that for a long while, in a kitchen that smelled faintly of beeswax in a house that shouldn't have had a candle burning in it. The 12th envelope, the one that wasn't tied with the others, the one I found last, tucked separately into the back of the drawer, wasn't in the same handwriting. It was dated 4 months ago, and it was short. Dear Eleanor, my father passed in March, peacefully, in his sleep, in his own garden, which I think he would have chosen if anyone had asked him. Among his things, we found a small bundle of correspondence with your address on it, never sent. He must have written them and not posted them towards the end, when his hands weren't what they'd been. I'm enclosing them, in case it means anything to you. He spoke of you sometimes, in his last years, always fondly, always the same way. The gate at the end of the lane, he'd say, and the roses. I hope this finds you well, whoever you are to him. He wanted you to know. Margaret, his daughter. Behind that letter were 3 more, never posted, written in the same shaking hand as the last September letter, dated in the months before he died. I won't tell you everything they said. Some things are meant to stay between 2 people, even after both of them are gone. Even when one of them is a stranger, reading another stranger's words by lamplight in a borrowed house. But I'll tell you the last line of the very last one, because I think about it more than I expected to, weeks later. I latched the gate myself, once, the night I left, though you never knew that. I made it a promise, too. I didn't sell the house. I want to be honest about the version of me that drove out to Lantern Lane planning to spend one night and be done with it by morning. That version made a sensible plan, and I broke it without much of a fight. I gave notice on my flat the following week. I learned, slowly and badly at first, how to keep a garden, which is harder than anyone tells you and more forgiving than you'd expect. The roses are doing better this year than last. I latched the gate every night, twice, the way I was told to when I was 9 years old and didn't understand why. I still don't know fully what to make of the candle that was burning the first night I arrived, in a house no one had a key to but me. I've stopped trying to explain it sensibly. Some nights, I think it doesn't need explaining at all, that some houses simply hold on to the people who loved them, the way Eleanor held on to letters she couldn't bring herself to open. And Thomas held on to a habit he couldn't bring himself to break for 43 Septembers, without ever once asking for anything back. I light a candle myself now, most evenings, and set it in that same brass holder on the windowsill. I don't entirely know who it's for. Maybe for both of them. Maybe just for the house, which waited a very long time for someone to come home to it. If you're still listening and the room around you has gone quiet and dark, the way mine does most nights. I hope, wherever you are, that someone is keeping a light on for you too. Good night.